Bum 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 bum. Hey Joanne, hey Jenny, hey Scott. Welcome to Coffee with Scott Adams, the weekend edition. Hey Ken, hey Chris, hey Sharona, Andy, Fuzzy, and Nikki. Good to see you all here. And I know that because you're the type of people who are responsible and prepared, not to mention smarter than usual and inexplicably sexy. Yeah, I'm talking about you. I know that you have prepared for Coffee with Scott Adams by preparing your favorite beverage. It might be in a glass, a mug, a stein, a vessel of some sort. I prefer coffee. You might go a different way, but join me now for the simultaneous sip. You're probably wondering what the air quality looks like at my house in Northern California. Oh yeah. You're looking out my window, so this is my view. So the trees that you can see are, there's a focus. The trees you can see are literally my neighbor's trees. So those are close. Everything behind it is obscured from view. So the fires, I think they're over 150 miles away. Now imagine this. This is my air quality in Pleasanton, California. So I'm in the Bay Area. The fires, I think the closest one is like 150, 170 miles away, something like that. And this is my air quality. Imagine if you're within 10 miles or 50 miles. So this is don't go outside air quality. Some of you saw the president's tweet blaming California for poor forest management. And people said, my God, you can't say that when people are in the middle of the fire. To which I say, I think it depends if it's true. And I don't know if it's true, do you? Is California bad at forest management? Does that have anything to do with anything? I don't know. I'd like to see some fact checking on that. I'm seeing people online blame the increase in forest fires on climate change, which I don't rule out. I don't think you can rule it out. But I'd like to know all the factors. One of the factors might be that there are more people stomping around doing dumb things. One of the factors might be forest management, but I don't know anything about that topic, and I don't know how you would know. So people are saying yes, that forest management is an issue, but let's see some more information on that from qualified people. All right. So my brother, whose location I won't reveal to you, is also in California, but he's already lost his internet and cable connection, and I guess the fire is 6 miles away, and he's on evacuation alert. So my brother's getting ready to abandon his home to the fire anytime now. I think probably there's more chance that smoke would be an issue where he is than fire, but I could be wrong because that fire could come right up to him. And as you might imagine, I know quite a few people who are in the fire zone, so I'll be worried about them today. Anyway, let's talk about other things that are happening. Are you watching the devious and diabolical work of the enemy of the people? The enemy of the people being the fake news industry, whoever they might be, especially if the fake news is the dangerous kind. So here's the fake news that's being spread by CNN right now, which is by their reporting, their racist reporting. And by the way, CNN is going full racist now. So they're not hiding it anymore. They used to be a little bit I don't know, maybe a little bit more clever about it, but now CNN has just gone full racist. And they're reporting that the president is singling out black women for criticism. Now, that's just a lie. It's fake news, because he's criticized everybody from Macron in France to Jim Acosta to whoever that guy was that stood next to Jim Acosta. It's hard to think of anybody he hasn't criticized this week, at least anybody who's on the other side. So the reality is he criticizes everybody, and it's actually really good news that there are so many African American women in important jobs. They have excellent jobs, which is why they're in the line of fire, same as Jim Acosta. Why is Jim Acosta in the president's line of fire? It's because Jim Acosta has a really good job. Why are the other women that Trump is well, he did, I'm not going to say alleged, but the other women that he insulted, what do they have in common? Okay, if you're CNN, what you say they have in common is that they're black women. If you are not a fucking racist, you say that what they have in common is excellent jobs. I apologize for the cursing. Sometimes it just comes out. But I'm watching the enemy of the people, the fake news industry, report it like it's fact that the president singles out black women for insults, when right in front of our eyes, we observe that not to be the case. That rather he insults all of his enemies, his critics, and he's nice to all of his friends. It's pretty consistent. If you can't notice that, you ought not to be in the news industry. So I think CNN has now just disgraced itself and gone full racist with that claim, because the essence of it is that his supporters are in on his giant racist scheme. But if this is the kind of shit that they use to make their case, they are the enemy of the people. There's no other way to spin this anymore. There's no other way to spin it. They are full racist, enemy of the people at this point. That being said, one of their biggest complaints, and I think Bernie Sanders said the same thing, is that there was a racist, that the midterms were a racist campaign, and that some of the races, the individual races were racist, and that in particular there was a racist ad that was so bad, according to CNN, even Fox News wouldn't run it. It was that racist. Here's my take on that. I saw the ad, and the first thing I thought is, oh crap, people are going to say this is racist. And then people will complain. And if you're Fox News, you have an obligation to your stockholders. And when people complain, and there's enough of it, complaints, you have to act, because you're that kind of a company. So, is it true what Fox News is, what CNN is reporting, that even Fox News won't run this ad because it's so racist? That is not true. That is fake news. What is true is that Fox News is not running the ads. That's true. What is not true is the reason. CNN says it's obvious that they're not doing it because even in their minds they know it's racist. Fox News has never said that. They may have said, which would be completely consistent with every corporation, they may have said, we can't take the heat, this isn't worth it. So we don't want the advertising money because the complaints are greater than the value of the advertising money. Now that would be a good reason not to run the ad, because the corporation can't handle that kind of pressure. That's very different from saying the Fox News decided the ads were racist so they wouldn't run them. So it's just fake news. Now, I'm not saying that they could be, that I know they're wrong. All I'm saying is that if the news is based on mind reading, In other words, CNN's assumption of what Fox News people are thinking but haven't said. If they're judging what they're thinking from what they're doing, I would say they've got one explanation, which fits the data. If Fox News thought it was racist, that would be a perfectly good reason not to run the ad. But why didn't they think that in the first place? Why did they run it in the first place? I'll tell you why. They ran it in the first place because when they looked at it, it didn't look racist to them. When the public looked at it, and the half of the country that's completely hypnotized by the enemy of the people, those people said, my God, this is clearly racist. It's just like Willie Horton's situation. When they said it's just like the Willie Horton situation, what kind of logic were they using? Was it an analogy? Yes, it was. They were making an analogy to the Willie Horton ad, which I think is less ambiguous, the Willie Horton ad. The Willie Horton ad was pretty racist. It's hard to defend that. And here's why the Willie Horton ad was racist. Because of all the criminals in the world, did you have to pick the black guy? Now, I understand that this particular criminal had an especially bad record, so he was extra scary. But I don't think anybody's believing that he was randomly picked and he just happened to be black. I'm sure there were plenty of white criminals that they could have picked from. So the Willie Horton ad, certainly all of your antenna should have gone up and you should say, well, why'd you pick the black guy? Okay, it's a little hard to defend. Although I'm sure they did defend it by saying he's a real person. We didn't make it up. But still, doesn't feel right. Now let's compare that to the border question. What type of people are coming across the border? People who live below the border. The people who are coming across the border, whether they be awesome people, which I think most of them actually are. I'm actually quite pro-immigrant from an emotional, just human level. I'm very pro-immigrant. From a systems perspective, you have to have good systems to have a good country and good outcomes. It gets more complicated. But is it true that with all those people coming in, some of them would be criminals? That feels unambiguously true. Did the ad that neither Fox nor CNN would run, because the impression it gave, did they have an option of showing people who did not live south of the border? Not really. This is almost exactly the opposite of the Willie Horton situation. Showing the people who are essentially 100% of the people coming across the border are people who live across the border. Those are the only people who can come in illegally from south of the border, are people who live south of the border. So showing somebody in particular, and the particular cop killer that they showed was a horrible person, but in the context of a campaign ad, the whole point of a campaign ad is not to show an accurate picture of the world. None of them do that. They're trying to show the worst case scary picture. That's what all political commercials do. They're all complete bullshit. Some are worse than others, but they're all bullshit. That's what they are. So showing that there is danger coming from below the border is typical campaign stuff, making you more afraid of something than you should be. What do the Democrats do in their campaign ads? Well, the Democrats make you afraid of just different stuff. They make you afraid of your citizens that are in the same country. So the only difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Republican ads are demonizing people who don't live in the country and are trying to get in illegally. They're not demonizing people who are coming in legally, no matter what they look like. Have you ever seen a Republican ad, campaign ad, that demonized people who are legally in the country? Not in recent time. I can't think of one. Probably not since, I can't even think of one. Has that ever happened? So both sides are demonizing a portion of the human population. The Democrats are demonizing Republicans, essentially painting them all as ignorant racists who are dangerous, literally dangerous. And the Republicans are portraying the illegal immigration as being especially dangerous. Now, both of them are exaggerating because it's a political context. So you have to put it in context that it's, they're both exaggerating. So the enemy of the people has now created this fake narrative which causes people like Antifa to feel comfortable camping out on Tucker Carlson's doorstep and terrorizing whoever was inside, which happened to be his wife. And I asked, in a tweet, I asked the following question. Has anybody asked Don Lemon, I just pick him as one of the enemy of the people, has anybody asked Don Lemon if he feels responsible for Antifa and showing up on Tucker Carlson's doorstep? Because what they were complaining about Tucker, their complaints were right off of CNN. It's like they just took the CNN talking points, put on masks, and walked up to Tucker's door. Now, how you feel about all of this depends on how you feel about the base claim, which is that the people are or are not racist. Because you would feel perhaps less empathy for somebody who was a straight up racist. Maybe you'd care less. But Tucker Carlson clearly is not that. I mean, he couldn't have a more public record. If you want to check his record, it's all there. He writes a lot. He's on TV a lot. You can look at it yourself. They just need to produce one clip, one piece of writing, any evidence of their claim. And then maybe we could talk about it. But I haven't seen that, have you? Instead, we see that the enemy of the people have hypnotized half the country, including Antifa, to think that there are monsters among us and that they appear on Fox News. Yes, that was a pen click. You heard. Let me say again that I think the temperature of the public probably went down a little. I'm talking about the average public that isn't even watching news necessarily, just the average public. I think when Democrats won the House, one of the three legs of the Trump criticisms just disappeared. One of those legs was that Trump was a dictator and that he was going to run roughshod over the rest of the government. Well, now that the House is owned by the Democrats, one of the biggest three things you're worried about just sort of went away. It was never true. And they're not really realizing that it was never true. But the fact that it went away so easily, meaning that the president said, congratulations, and I think I can work with Nancy Pelosi, he didn't say, let's overturn the result, let's ignore Congress. He said, let's see if we can work together. That's exactly what happened. So that went away. And at the same time, I talked about how the president was so public, doing all of his rallies, doing an 87-minute, public press conference, covering all kinds of topics. And in none of that did he look mentally deranged. That's the wrong word. In none of that did he look like he had some kind of a mental problem, which was the other leg of the stool. So that's two legs that just got kicked out of the stool. Three, if you count the Russia probe. This stool has multiple legs. It has as many legs as my analogy wants it to have. And all that's left is imagining what's in the president's head. Think about it. All of the complaints that they had about the president that were fact-based are being disproven. All right. So one of the fact-based predictions about this president is that he would be bad for the economy. Well, now the facts have clearly shown that the economy is thriving under President Trump. You can still argue about who gets how much credit and that sort of thing, but you can't argue anymore that he's bad for the economy. Now, some people have argued, yeah, but what about the deficit? To which I say, nobody even knows what a government deficit is. It's not like personal debt. Unlike you, the government doesn't actually have to pay its debt. And I know some of you just went, what? What do you mean the government doesn't have to pay its debt? If it doesn't, it'll default. And no, it won't. The government just has to pay the interest on the debt. You can't do that. Eventually, if you have a business or personal loan, as an individual or as a company, eventually you have to pay it off. Right? After you've paid it down, you can talk about refinancing and getting other loans. But even if you have a revolving credit, you kind of have to pay it down. The government doesn't need to do that. The government can simply pay the interest rate and wait for inflation to take what is a gigantic number down to a small number. But of course, it could only do that if it's not adding to the debt more than it's deflating. But the point is, it's not like regular debt. So people who are looking at the economy and saying, this is terrible, don't really understand how national debt works. The other thing people don't understand is that this is my factual belief, subject to your fact checking, that the percentage of debt is actually not as high as it's been in the past. So as a number, it's the biggest number it's ever been. But as a percentage of GDP, I believe it's been higher in the past. So there's that. And the other thing people don't understand is that when interest rates are low, that's a good time to borrow a bunch of money. And interest rates have been low for a while. So it's actually a pretty good time to rack up some debt if your intention is to stimulate the economy and if you think in the long run you have a way to trim that debt later. If if it's going to go up forever, you've got problems. But you should be paying down the debt when the interest rate is high. And I think the interest rate was higher during the Bill Clinton years, wasn't it? So that would have been the time to pay down the debt, as Clinton did. And under Obama and under Trump, even on Obama and Trump, the interest rates were low, so it was probably a good time to run up some debt and use other people's money. Anyway, the point is, nobody really knows how much debt is too much, but we all feel like we're economists when we talk about this thing. Somebody says, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You left out your reasons. Hey, it was probably an oversight. Did your criticism accidentally leave out the reason? Or is it just dumb because it's not what you think? Because if you and I are talking to each other and you think I'm an idiot and I think you're an idiot, we can't tell which one is right. So I can't rule it out. I can't rule out that everything I say on these periscopes or even just that one thing is completely stupid. Can't rule it out. But if you've ruled it out on your end, we've already identified who's the dumb one here. All right. So my point being that the factual stuff about the president is being disproven at a fairly regular clip. He hasn't blown up the world. He has not acted crazy. He has not gotten richer, as far as we can tell. He's probably gotten poorer. So you have to, if all of the facts are not lining up, you have to back up to mind reading. So CNN, the enemy of the people, and by the way, the president has been saying that fake news is the enemy of the people. But I don't think there's a distinction anymore. It feels to me that CNN has just gone over to the dark side, and they're no longer even trying to present the news, because most of the reporting is about the president, and the way they present the president is so obviously opinion dressed up as news that I don't know if you can make that distinction anymore about the fake news versus CNN. It feels like they've completely gone over to the darkest of the dark side. I mean, this is literally evil. This is actual literal evil. But I almost wonder if they even know it. Like if you were to talk to somebody from CNN privately, any of the on-air talent, if you could get them in a room privately and talk to them, would they know what they're doing? Because I actually don't know the answer to that. And I try to be consistent about not reading minds of other people and just observing what's happening. You can observe that what they're promoting as news is clearly not true and clearly slanted for a narrative. I mean, that part is obvious. It's obvious on both sides, right? Nobody's doubting that anymore. But we don't know exactly what they're thinking. And I'm actually genuinely curious. There are some people, and I would say Anna Navarro, somebody mentioned her name, probably are in the category of, if you were just going to bet without actually knowing, because again, we can't read their minds. I would bet that there's a mixture of people who really believe what they're saying and some of them who don't, but are sort of going along with it. And I would love to know what that breakdown is. I feel like I can tell by looking at their demeanor, but I think that's probably my imagination. Anyway, so the enemy of the people is working hard this week. Look for the number of stories where mind reading is the primary thing that you have to buy into to buy the rest of the story. All right, will I go on Bill Maher again? I don't see the slightest chance that Bill Maher would invite me on his show again, do you? Do you think there's even the smallest chance that I could ever be on Bill Maher's show again? Now keep in mind that my appearance there probably got pretty good ratings because I said something that was provocative, that Trump would get elected. I gave my reasons and I didn't hear anybody push back. So that alone should have been remarkable in the context of that show. And then once I was proven right about all of the big stuff, you would think I would be the ideal person to have back, but I would break their world so badly if I came back that I just don't know if it could be done. I don't know if they could ever invite me back. Yeah, they can certainly have people on the show who are conservatives. I'm not doubting that they can do that. But having me personally on there with a long string of being right about things and in public and on that show in particular would break the narrative a little bit. They can always say, Steve Bannon, he's the devil. He was the devil before, he's still the devil. So having Steve Bannon on the show doesn't challenge their worldview. Having me on the show would definitely challenge their worldview. And but I don't think it's going to happen. And I mean that literally. I'm not just saying that for effect. I don't think that can happen. Likewise, I don't see any scenario in which I would be invited on CNN because I've been too critical of them. All right, let's talk about election fraud. We are watching Marco Rubio fighting valiantly for some kind of a transparency in the vote in Broward County. And I've said this before, but Marco Rubio is kind of a good dude. I kind of like, at least since the presidential election is over, when Rubio's in his presidential mode, when he's in his senator mode and he's just doing his job as a senator, I really like the stuff that comes out of him. Seems pretty reasonable. He never seems crazy, and he does seem to pick topics and put a good good viewpoint on them. Whether you agree or not, he's a credible player who, by all appearances, seems to be trying to get good results for the state and the country. But here's the thing to watch out for: the Broward vote counting situation is a fog of war situation. Almost everything that we hear coming out of there for the next few days, you should assume is not credible. It would not be credible coming from the other side. It would not be credible coming from your own side. Because right now there's a whole bunch of speculation and a lot of mind reading. There's a lot of mind reading. Some of it won't be wrong. In other words, some of the things that people are suspecting about the other side will probably be right, but we can't really know because we can't read minds. Now, part of what makes this interesting is that the woman in charge, Brenda Snipes, here's the best. Everything about the simulation and the script that we're watching here is so interesting in sometimes all the wrong ways. So while the enemy of the people has been calling Trump a racist for criticizing black women, by coincidence, there's another powerful, successful black woman. And again, how can we gloss over the fact that there are so many highly successful black women in the news? It's literally like the best news you've ever heard in your life that there are that many successful black women working at the highest levels that they can come under fire from the President of the United States. It's kind of good news, But because the enemy of the people has set it up so that they're saying the president keeps going after black women, they're kind of tying his hands very cleverly, by the way. I'm not saying they don't lack skill. So the skill level is pretty high, but they've done a good job of inoculating this Brenda Snipes because they're telling the story that the president goes after black women. So she's already got a little protective shield around her thanks to the enemy of the people. And let me jump in and say this. Calling CNN the enemy of the people, I want to be really clear. Nobody should act on that in any physical, violent way. I don't think anybody should be accosting them. No pun intended. Nobody should be accosting them in public. Nobody should be showing up at their doorstep. Nobody should be doing anything physical or threatening to anybody who works at CNN or anybody, just anybody. But it still can be true that there could be organized forces within the country that are working against the best interest of the country. That can still be true, but we still live in a republic, and there are ways to fix things that don't require showing up at somebody's house. So don't do that. Let me be clear about that. So anyway, my overall comment about the Broward County stuff is I see what you see, which is a lot of irregularities. But so far the irregularities have not risen to the level of, I don't know, is smoking gun the right word here? They have not risen to the level of, my God, they all have to go to jail. But it could. You can't rule it out. No, yeah, I see somebody saying, come on, Scott, please. Two of you said that. Come on. It's obvious, right? Scott, it's obvious. It's obvious something's going on. Let me give you my opinion. It looks to me exactly the way it looks to you. On my irrational part of my brain that makes most of my decisions, just like you, everything I'm seeing looks like voter fraud. So trust me, I see the same thing you do. It all looks like voter fraud to me. It looks blatant. It looks obvious. But it's also the fog of war. So the things that are being reported initially, just take it with a grain of salt. If I had to place money on it, I don't know if you can bet on this. Can you bet on this? If I could bet on this, on predict it, I would place a very large bet that there's substantial fraud going on in Broward County this week. So if you're going to ask me to bet on it, that's easy. I would definitely bet that it's happening. I don't know how big it is. I don't know if could it really be tens of thousands of votes? I'm not going to rule that out. I would say the odds of substantial fraud are close to 100%. Would you mostly agree with that? The chance that there's something that you would call substantial and intentional fraud in Broward County, I think the odds of some of it being true are close to 100%. The odds of it being so big that they're blatantly trying to steal an election is less than 100%. Maybe 80%, maybe 75%, maybe 95%, but it's less than 100. So let's wait and see. If it turns out that there is provable, massive, intentional voter fraud in the tens of thousands of votes, and they were literally trying to change the outcome of an election, you can't say I was wrong, because I'm putting very high odds on that being the case. I'm just saying, don't jump to 100% yet. Just maintain a little bit of healthy skepticism, and then, if you put a 90% or 99% on it, at least you're part of the rational conversation. If it turns out that it's 85,000 extra votes and it changes the election, then people got to go to jail. People have to go to jail. Here's my idea for checking voter results. You ready for this? It goes like this. You have an app, just an app that anybody can download. Or if somebody gets a link by an email, they can click the link and it takes them to the app so they can download it. And the app's only purpose was to ask you who you voted for, and then have some way to compare that to how your vote was counted. I'm not sure if they could do that, but after you vote, can you tell who it was who was the voter? Here's a dumb question. Can the people counting the votes associate the vote with an actual specific individual? Does the voting process do that, or does it remove the identity and just make it a voting thing? Can somebody answer that question for me? There's a little delay here, so. So let me just finish the point. The point was that randomly people would get a notification on the app. They wouldn't be able to do it on their own, but randomly they would get a notification, and the notification would say, they are secret. So people are saying it's a secret ballot. So how about we change that? There's probably a way to associate the person and the vote in a way that still keeps it. Yeah, I'll bet there's a way to randomize things or to hide identities so that you can figure out if the person who has the app says, yes, I voted this way, that you can match it to the actual vote. So I think there would be a way to use an app with some changes to the voting system so that you could guarantee that you've checked enough places to find any problems. So if you find several people in one city that say, I voted this way, but you can check and the vote went the other way, there you go. Now, one way you could adjust this is that there must be plenty of people who would not care if their voting record was public. So maybe some people could say and go into the voting booth and say, hey, I'm one of those people. I'm willing to be public. And if anybody wants to be private, they can still be private, but I'm willing to be public. And then maybe only those people use the app, because those are the ones who have given away their identity, and then you can check. I think that might work. And here's another question that I ask. I'll probably ask this often, but if our voting system was so good, why do recounts even exist? The fact that every state has a recount system and that we do it often, is it only in case of mistakes? Really? Is that the only reason we have recounts? Because we might have made a mistake? To me, it seems that the fact that recounts are universally, accepted probably suggests that the system is at least susceptible to corruption. Have you heard anything about Russia interfering with the midterms? Did I just realize that the biggest story in the world is the one that's not being told? Here's the dog that isn't barking. Wouldn't we know by now if Russia tried to influence the midterms? Shouldn't that be the top line story on every news site? It should be the top line story whether they did or they did not, right? Because it's still the biggest story. As long as Mueller is still doing his thing, it should be still the biggest story. Russia did or did not, or we don't know, influence the election. Where's that story? There should be massive stories about how we cannot detect Russia doing anything with our election. How does that fit with Trump can't manage Russia? How does any of that fit with the story that Trump is a Russian puppet? How do we explain that apparently Putin allowed Democrats to win the House and didn't seem to do anything to stop it? Does that seem like Putin and Trump are working together? There's a big problem in the narrative that Trump and Putin are working together. And there's a big problem in the narrative that Trump is not doing enough to prevent Russia from messing with our elections. Because it looks to me like Russia got out of Dodge, or they're so clever that they got away with it this time. But I feel like we'd at least have some rumors that they were doing something. We don't even have rumors about Russia interfering with the midterms, do we? It might be because Democrats won. Do you think if Republicans had prevailed in the House that we would have no stories about Russians influencing the election? There's no way to know, but you have to ask that question, don't you? You have to ask that question. Oh, speaking of asking the question, so when I tweeted that somebody should ask Don Lemon whether his actions were influencing Antifa, his answer should be the same as Trump's, which is from a legal perspective, you don't blame people who are talking for people who are acting. So from a legal perspective, of course Don Lemon has no responsibility for Antifa. But also, of course, President Trump has no legal responsibility for any of these mass shooters. But are both of them involved in raising the temperature by departing from, let's say, a strict factual description of reality? And the answer is yes. So from a scientific perspective, there's still a thing called cause and effect, and it certainly seems reasonable to assume that anybody who's raising the temperature is responsible for things that happen when you raise the temperature. And it's quite clear that both the president and CNN do that. They get people pretty worked up. No stories of voter suppression. I guess that's true. There were lots of stories where people were there were stories that people were going to attempt voter suppression, but I haven't seen a story about actual voter suppression. That's a good point. I'm not saying there isn't any, I just haven't seen any stories. Somebody loved my broadcast from last night? That's interesting. So heated rhetoric never hurt anybody? That's not true. Heated rhetoric has hurt lots of people. In what world has heated rhetoric never hurt anybody? Heated rhetoric probably hurts more people than anything else because it always escalates. Not always, but it can escalate. Bernie and Michael Moore are claiming suppression. So maybe I'm just not seeing those stories. They're not on the front page of CNN. Were all of the protests on Thursday peaceful? Is it my imagination, or were the protests against Jeff Sessions' firing, were those protests the lowest energy protests you've ever heard of? It barely made the news. There were a few pictures of it, and then it was like, because Trump messes with the minds of his critics so thoroughly that he had them protesting to keep somebody they didn't want, and they desperately didn't want. It was the strangest thing you've ever seen. PayPal shut down Tony Robinson's account? That can't be true. Oh, you mean Tommy Robinson? Yeah, it was a very low energy protest. And so I'll reiterate my prediction because it's so my prediction is so counter to what you're observing that you should, Tommy Robinson. My prediction is so counter to what you think you're watching that it should shock you. And you should think I'm wrong. But remember how many times I predicted things that you thought were wrong. Quite a few times, right? So here's another one. I think that the temperature with the regular voting public, the people who don't really follow the politics, is probably down because they're observing the country is running okay, economy is okay, wages are going up, international stuff seems to be totally under control. You don't even hear about ISIS anymore. They're not even a story. ISIS is not even in a story anymore. That's about as successful as you can get militarily. North Korea, it's a little bit of a, up and down there, but clearly moving in the right direction. So I think the public is ignoring the news for the most part, and that their temperature actually is down because reality is violating what they imagined was going to happen under a Trump administration. People are not being rounded up. The economy is fine. No nuclear wars. In fact, all the opposite of what they predicted. But the television news media, their business model requires them to, crank things up to DEFCON 20 so that you're in a continuous fight or flight mode. So the people who watch the television the most, the people who follow the news the most, are probably at their highest rate of insanity. But I don't think that describes the general population, who is clearly by now noticing that their life is going pretty well. And they have more things to worry about than the news. So that's my prediction is that the press will get increasingly crazy at the same time that the general public will get more and more calm because they're learning to tune out the crazy press. One way that you could measure that is in 6 months check with the popularity of President Trump. If his popularity continues to inch up, even just a little bit, 1%, 2%, if the president is 2% more popular 6 months from now, what are you going to conclude? I think you'd have to conclude that the temperature came down, even as the press is painting a picture of the temperature going up. They need the temperature to go up for their business model to make money. Florida has 5 minutes to give the count to the courts. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think Brenda Snipes will be taken out in handcuffs? Is that possible? Because I feel like it's heading in that direction. I feel like Brenda Snipes will actually be removed in handcuffs. You know, I'm not going to make that a prediction, but isn't it sort of heading in that direction? It feels like it is. Now, that would be problematic in terms of the way it looks. So the look of it would be terrible. Well, maybe that's a good reason to do it. I'm not entirely sure whose side the sheriff is on. Oh, somebody's saying that the sheriff is on her side. Well, if that's the case, then is it the local authorities? It's the state. It's only the state who has authority, right? Is it possible that the FBI and the feds could get involved in a county's election results under the theory that the impact crosses state boundaries? Is there any theory that makes it a federal offense? It feels like they could make it federal. Wow, that's pretty radical for you. Radical what? To remove somebody who's a criminal? If it's shown that she's defying the court and it's actually holding up the country, it does feel like she should be removed in handcuffs. Doesn't that feel like the appropriate response to something that, if it's shown, and you know, I'm still on the side of we're in fog of war, let her be innocent until proven guilty. All right. So my view on Brenda Snipes is innocent until proven guilty. I know you hate that, but let's keep a standard here. All right. No matter who it is, innocent until proven guilty. I see the same stuff you see. So I think that the odds of her being guilty are very high, but let's keep her innocent until proven guilty. All right. It was a federal election, but I don't know how the laws work in terms of authority over the voting machines and the voting count. That might be separate from the fact that it was a federal election. Voting is a civil rights issue. Is that good enough? That might be good enough. I don't know. Oh yeah, the big story in the Wall Street Journal about Trump's payoffs to women. I talked about this last night, but I'll just reiterate. So it's being called news that Trump knew about the payments to the women to keep them quiet. Is there anybody in the entire world who thought he didn't know about it? It's not really news. If 100% of the world knew it before it was in the news, that would be an example of not news. In fact, if I were to define what not news means, it would be something that everybody knew for a year. That's like the very definition of not news. So it's not really news if they're reporting that the president knew about it. And if the issue is, hey, he lied about something in his personal life, I say, if you can't lie about that, what the hell can you lie about? Lying just to make this problem go away is exactly what I would want him to do for the benefit of the country. I would want the president to totally lie about irrelevant to the country. If he needs to lie about that just to make it go away so he can get on with the business of work, I'm all in. I'm 100% supportive of lying about stuff that doesn't matter in your personal life. Completely on board with that. Now somebody's going to say, hey, do the ends justify the means? To which I say, yeah, a lot. Because the ends were a minor lie about a personal situation. Totally trivial to the country. But he's the head of the country, and so we want him to be effective in his job. So which one is more important? Being an effective leader of the United States or telling the truth about something in your personal life that doesn't matter to one frickin' person on the whole planet. Do the ends justify the means? Yes, unless you're an idiot. Unless you're an absolute moron. The costs and the benefits can be compared. The cost is he lied about something trivial that we don't care about, that we wish he had gotten away with the lie because we don't want to talk about it, because we don't care what happened in his personal life. We didn't hire him for that. We did not hire him to be our role model, right? Compared to possibly destroying the United States and the entire world because because he's become less, let's say less effective because he has to deal with this issue. These are not even close to being as important. So I support the lie, assuming it was a lie, about his personal life. And if he does it again, I support that too. In fact, I support every lie the president tells, and every other politician, by the way. Just so you know, I'm being consistent, because this is the point where people jump in and say, "Oh, you apologist, you will say anything to back the president." In my defense, the same argument I said about Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was being taken down for this Monica Lewinsky stuff, I said loudly and often, I didn't have as much of a platform then, but to anyone who would listen, I said it's none of our business. Let him get away with a lie. Let him just get back to his personal life. It's not our problem. So I think the standard that I applied to Bill Clinton, which is his personal life is not my problem and not my concern, and if he wants to lie about it just to make it go away, I'm all in. I was all in when Bill Clinton did it. I'm all in when President Trump did it, assuming that's what happened. So that story, if those are the stories in the news, things are going really well. Think about the biggest complaints about the president. Just put these in context. Here are the biggest complaints about the president. He said something that insulted the president of France. Does anybody care? And he still had a good meeting with him, and Macron is, friendly enough with the president that it's not really a problem. So that's sort of a no big deal. France, nothing's really happening there that matters. Secondly, the news that he insults black women. Well, that's just fake news because he insults everybody. And the good news is, it turns out that there are a lot of black women who have excellent jobs at high levels. So they're on the radar now. That's all good news. Then let's see, what else is the news? The other news, that he got rid of Jeff Sessions, which nobody on the right wanted Jeff Sessions to remain, and nobody on the left wanted Jeff Sessions to remain. That's the worst criticism about the president, is he fired somebody that nobody wanted. That's it. He fired somebody that everybody wanted gone. Now, of course, the concern about Jeff Sessions from the anti-Trumpers is that the next thing he'll do is fire Mueller. But here's the thing. He hasn't fired Mueller. It's not really news that somebody might do something you don't like. Because people might do lots of things you don't like. That's not news. That's mind reading, right? Now, if he were to do this, well, then it becomes news. But at the moment, it's not news. It's nothing but imaginary news. It's imagining that something will happen. Now, let's say he uses Whitaker or whoever he uses to replace Whitaker. And by the way, the president has signaled very clearly that Whitaker's not going to stay around. I don't know if you saw that, but the president's acting like he's never met him and doesn't know him that well. He's just a temporary fill-in. And the fact that Rod Rosenstein actually praised Whitaker also makes it feel like maybe he sees it as a short-term thing and he's just trying to get past it. So I don't think we have to worry about Whitaker keeping the job. It's feeling like that's not likely. But Suppose somebody like Whitaker starts putting a little pressure on Mueller just to wrap things up, at the same time that Mueller has signaled that he wants to wrap things up. So what if Mueller is wrapping things up and Mueller thinks it'll take 3 months to do it, but he's in the wrap-up phase? And let's say somebody pushes him to get it done in a month and a half. That's the problem? What does a manager do with every project, no matter what company you're in, no matter what industry you're in? There's a project going on and you're the boss. What does every boss do with every project? They say, what do you mean it'll take 3 months? I need that done in a month and a half. Wrap it up. All right, so managing somebody's budget and their timelines is really just business as usual. So given that Mueller's almost done, and I think everybody assumes that he's almost done. Now, if it were the beginning of the process, that would be a big problem. But at this point, is there anybody left to talk to? Probably not. Just the president, and they're not going to talk to him, so there's not much left to say. So think about it. Those are the biggest stories. The biggest stories, and then there was the protest. So the protest is because people think that Mueller has the goods on Trump. In other words, the protests were over Russia collusion, which, as far as we can tell, if we're just looking at facts, doesn't exist. So the worst complaints about the president right now are the made-up complaints about targeting black women for criticism, which we can observe. It doesn't require any research. You can just turn on the news and see him insulting everybody. So that's easily disproven. There's the Russia stuff, which is literally imaginary. Now, I'm not saying that Mueller has found nothing, because we need to wait and see. But at the moment, nothing is leaked. Nothing is even slightly telling us, nothing's even leaning in that direction at all. So it's sort of an imaginary mind-reading problem. So if your problems have been reduced from, think about the problems when Trump took over. The economy wasn't going well. That's a big problem. Jobs aren't good enough. That's a big problem. Things were going well, but they weren't good enough. These are big things. ISIS is still a big problem. North Korea is still a big problem. Trade deals, still a big problem. How many of those things are still big problems? Not a lot, all right? So all CNN has left are things which are imaginary, literally imaginary. Like they're imagining that he's making fun of people, he's targeting people, but clearly that's not the case. The facts demonstrate that as clearly as anything could be demonstrated. And so you've got imaginary racism in terms of targeting black women. You've got imaginary Russia collusion. And you've got imaginary he's going to fire Mueller, which he might, but at this moment we're just imagining it. So if all of your problems are imaginary, that's sort of as good as you can get. All right, I think I've beaten that point into the ground, and I'm going to hang up now and hope everybody does well in this California fire. I've got some people I need to check on, and I will talk to you later.